there are two kinds of silence in a marriage. The first is comfortable. The kind that settles over a kitchen on a Sunday morning, when two people who love each other don't need to fill every moment with words. The second kind is a weapon. Hazel Beaumont had been living inside the second kind for almost 8 months before she decided to stop surviving it and start dismantling it. Her husband, Bennett, was a cardiologist at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that came from decades of people handing him their hearts, literally, and trusting him to fix them. He was good at fixing things that belonged to strangers. He had never once bothered to notice that his own home was bleeding out. Hazel was 32. Before she married Bennett 6 years ago, she had been a licensed structural engineer with Morrison & Webb, the third largest infrastructure firm in Ontario. She had designed bridge load assessments, overseen the rehabilitation of aging overpasses on the 401, and once stayed up for 36 hours straight recalculating stress tolerances for a project in Hamilton, because she refused to let a single number be wrong. She was methodical. She was precise. She understood, better than most people, that the thing that looks stable from the outside is often already failing at the joints. She had left Morrison & Webb when their daughter, Eloise, was born 2 years into the marriage. Bennett had asked her to, not demanded, asked in that careful surgical way of his, the way he framed everything so that the request sounded like common sense and any resistance sounded like selfishness. You make good money, but I make extraordinary money. The math is simple, Hazel, and Eloise needs a parent who is present. He had said a parent, but he had meant a mother, and they both knew it. She had agreed. She told herself it was temporary. That was 3.5 years ago. The receipt was the first crack in the foundation. It was a Tuesday in February. Bennett had left his gym bag on the mudroom bench, which he never did. He was meticulous about his things, almost compulsively so. Hazel moved it to hang up Eloise's snowsuit, and the bag tipped, spilling a water bottle, a resistance band, and a folded piece of paper onto the slate tile. She picked it up. It was a receipt from Auberge du Pommier, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks earlier. 2 tasting menus. 2 glasses of the 2019 Barolo. The total was $412. She had eaten leftover soup that Wednesday. She remembered because Eloise had knocked a full bowl onto the kitchen floor and they had both cried. Eloise because she was startled, and Hazel because she was tired in a way that went all the way to the bone. Bennett had told her he was in a late surgical consult. She put the receipt back exactly where she found it. She zipped the bag. She hung up Eloise's snowsuit. Then she went upstairs, ran the bath, sat in the water until it went cold, and thought very carefully about what kind of woman she wanted to be when this was over. She did not want to be the kind who screamed. She did not want to be the kind who begged. She had designed structures meant to carry enormous weight without collapsing. She understood load-bearing. She understood what it meant to distribute force across a system so that when the time came to remove one element, the entire thing came down in a controlled, intentional way. Not a catastrophe, but a demolition. She started quietly. The first person she called was her older sister, Margot, who lived in Calgary and had never once pretended to like Bennett. Margot was a corporate lawyer. She did not offer sympathy on that phone call. She offered a referral, the name of the best family law practitioner in Ontario, a woman named Delia Fontaine whose reputation for precision in asset division was, according to Margot, quietly legendary. Hazel met Delia at her office on King Street West on a Thursday while Eloise was at preschool. Delia was 50-something, small, with reading glasses she wore, pushed up onto her forehead like a second pair of eyes watching the ceiling. She listened to Hazel for 11 minutes without writing anything down. Then she picked up her pen. Before we discuss strategy, Delia said, I need to know everything that's in your name, everything in his, and everything you both signed. Hazel had already made a list. What Bennett did not know. What he had never thought to ask about, because he had never found her finances interesting, was that Hazel's grandmother had died 14 months earlier and left her a property in Prince Edward County. A renovated century farmhouse on 4 acres outside Picton, assessed at just under $900,000. The estate had transferred directly to Hazel under the terms of her grandmother's will, which had been drawn up 3 years before the marriage. It had never been commingled with marital assets. It was hers, clean and unambiguous, the way a well-poured foundation is clean. She had never mentioned it to Bennett, not because she was hiding it. At the time, it had felt too raw, too personal, too connected to her grandmother to bring into their household conversations about tax brackets and investment portfolios. But standing in Delia's office, she understood for the first time that the silence had also been protective. The property in Peck, Delia said, making a note. He has no claim. Hazel confirmed. And your engineering license? Lapsed. But renewable. Delia looked at her over the reading glasses. Renew it. The investigation she commissioned came next. She did not hire someone through a referral this time. She found him through a forum for women navigating difficult divorces. The kind of online community that speaks in coded language until you post once and the private messages start arriving. His name was Terrence. He was a former OPP officer who now worked independently. He charged $1,800 a week and he asked for nothing except a clear brief and the patience to let him work. He took 5 weeks. At the end of those 5 weeks, he delivered a USB drive containing surveillance footage, time-stamped photographs, and a document cross-referencing Bennett's hospital schedule with his actual location on 43 separate evenings over the past 7 months. The woman's name was Sabine. She was 29, a pharmaceutical sales representative, who called on St. Michael's twice a month. She was not a secret in the way Bennett probably believed she was. Terrence had found 3 colleagues at the hospital who knew, one of whom had made an uncomfortable joke about it at a department holiday party that Hazel had not attended because Eloise had an ear infection. Hazel looked at the photographs for exactly 9 minutes. Then she put the USB drive in her grandmother's old cedar jewelry box, which lived at the back of her closet, and she made dinner. She spent the next 4 months doing 3 things simultaneously. The first was renewing her engineering license. She studied at the kitchen table after Eloise went to bed, the same table where she used to supervise Bennett's cufflink choices, and listen to him describe his surgical cases with the performed exhaustion of a man who needed to be told he was exceptional. The renewal exam was offered in April. She passed it on the first attempt with a score that put her in the top 12% of candidates that session. The second thing was contacting Morrison and Webb. She sent an email to her former principal, a man named Douglas, who had hired her straight out of U of T and once told her she had the best structural instinct of anyone he'd worked with under 40. Douglas called her back within 2 hours. They met for coffee. By the end of the month, she had a consulting contract. 3 days a week, with a path to full reinstatement in September. She did not tell Bennett she was working. She scheduled her hours around Eloise's preschool days and told Bennett the occasional evening absence was a mommy and me class that had moved to a new location. The third thing was the farmhouse in Picton. She drove out there on a Saturday in March while Bennett was doing rounds. She took Eloise, who fell asleep in the car on the way there, and woke up running through a field that still had patches of old snow at its edges. The house was solid. The roof had been redone the year before her grandmother died. The bones were exceptional. Hazel walked through every room with the deliberate attention she used to give structural reports, and she understood, standing in the kitchen with its wide pine floors, and the window above the sink that faced east, that this was not a backup plan. This was the plan. She arranged for a local contractor to make 2 small repairs that had been sitting since the estate transfer. She opened a separate bank account with Scotiabank, one that Bennett had no access to, and began directing her Morrison and Webb consulting income into it. She did not feel guilty about this. She felt precise. In May she called Delia. "I'm ready," she said. "Tell me the timeline," Delia said. Hazel told her. She wanted to file on a Thursday. She wanted Bennett to be served at the hospital, not to humiliate him publicly, but because it was the one place he could not immediately escalate without consequences for his professional reputation, which was the thing he guarded more carefully than anything else in his life. She wanted temporary possession of the house secured before he had a chance to consult his own counsel and start moving money. Delia had been preparing the filing for 3 weeks already. She had been waiting for Hazel to say the word. "One more thing," Hazel said. "I want to be out of the house before he gets home that night, not hiding, just finished." There was a brief silence. "You have somewhere to go?" "Yes." "Then we proceed Thursday." On the Wednesday night before Bennett came home at 9:45, Hazel was in the living room, reading. Eloise was long asleep. He sat down across from her with the particular looseness of a man who has recently been well attended to, and he told her about a difficult case that afternoon. A 60-year-old man with a dissected aorta, and how the surgery had gone exceptionally well, and how the resident assisting him had been impressive, actually impressive, not just adequately competent. He talked for 20 minutes. He did not ask about her day. He did not ask about Eloise's day. He poured himself 2 fingers of single malt and went upstairs. Hazel sat in the living room for another hour. She was not devastated. She was done. Thursday morning, she woke at 5:30. She had packed 2 weeks earlier. Not everything, just what mattered. Eloise's things, her grandmother's jewelry box, her engineering files, the framed photograph from her convocation that had lived in a box in the basement since Bennett had redecorated the study 3 years ago and not found a place for it. The boxes were in the back of her Subaru, covered by a blanket Eloise had requested for the drive, the one with the small foxes on it. She dropped Eloise at her mother's house in Scarborough. Her mother, a quiet, careful woman named Paulette, had known something was happening for months. She asked no questions. She simply took Eloise by the hand and said, "We'll make pancakes." Hazel drove back to the house. She moved through it one last time. She took nothing that was jointly theirs, nothing that could complicate the filing. She left his things precisely where they were. His running shoes in the mudroom, his cufflinks on the bathroom counter, the framed print he'd bought at a Yorkville gallery that she had always found cold. She took the spider plant from the kitchen windowsill because it had been her grandmother's cutting, and it had survived 2 repottings, and she was not leaving it. At 11:47 a.m., a process server entered the cardiology department at St. Michael's Hospital and delivered an envelope to Dr. Bennett Ashworth. Inside was a petition for divorce, a temporary possession order for the family home, a copy of the emergency motion Delia had filed that morning regarding child custody and financial disclosure, and a single handwritten note. The note read, "The consulting position at Morrison & Webb started in March. The license was renewed in April. The house in Picton is in my name alone and has been since Grandma Sylvie died. I've been carrying more than you thought. Don't contact me through the house, I won't be there." Witnesses later described Bennett as standing very still in the hallway outside his office for almost 2 full minutes before walking into the men's room, and not emerging for 11 minutes. The colleague who told this to Terence. And Terence told it to Hazel, because she had asked for nothing but the truth, in all directions. Said Bennett's face had gone the specific gray of a man who has just understood, in one accelerating moment, the full shape of what he thought he was managing. He called her 17 times between noon and 3 p.m. She did not answer. His texts moved through a predictable sequence. Confusion, then justification, then anger, then something that almost resembled remorse. Though Hazel, reading them that evening from the farmhouse with a cup of tea and Eloise asleep in the next room, recognized it as the remorse of someone grieving the loss of a comfortable situation rather than the loss of a person. At 4 p.m. he called Margot. Margot, to her lasting credit, let it go to voicemail. The litigation was not short. Bennett hired one of the most aggressive family law firms in the city, the kind with a dark wood waiting room and a junior associate, whose only job appeared to be making the opposing party feel that the ground was moving. They argued that Hazel's consulting income during the marriage, concealed from the household, should be treated as a breach of financial disclosure obligations. Delia handled this with the weary precision of someone who had seen the argument 12 times before. The income was recent, clearly documented, deposited into a separate account that had existed for less than 8 months of a 6-year marriage. It was not marital property. They argued that the farmhouse, though titled in Hazel's name, had benefited from marital funds through property tax payments made from the joint account. Delia countered with an accounting that showed the cumulative tax payments over 14 months, offered to reimburse Bennett's proportional share from the joint estate, and noted pleasantly that the offer more than offset his claim. They tried 3 other angles. Each one collapsed under documentation that Hazel had prepared, with the same attention she gave to load calculations. Nothing approximate, nothing assumed, nothing that could fail under pressure. What Bennett's lawyers could not counter, what nobody could have countered, was the evidence Terence had gathered, the photographs, the receipts, the hotel folios, the testimony of 2 hospital colleagues who, once the case became semi-public, were not willing to lie under oath to protect a man they didn't particularly respect. Sabine, for her part, was not mentioned in the proceedings. She had nothing to do with the outcome. The affair was relevant only as it pertained to the conduct provisions in their marriage contract. Yes, they had one, drafted at Margot's insistence before the wedding, which Bennett had signed with the confidence of a man who did not believe he would ever need to worry about it. It provided for a significant adjustment in asset division in the event of proven infidelity. Delia called it a persuasive clause. Bennett's lawyers called it several other things, none of which changed the fact that he had signed it. The settlement was finalized in October. Hazel retained full custody of Eloise, with Bennett having scheduled access every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. An arrangement the judge described as appropriate, given the documentation of his actual presence in the family home over the preceding 2 years, which Terence had also helpfully compiled. Hazel retained the farmhouse in its entirety. The matrimonial home in Rosedale was sold, the equity split according to the adjusted terms of the marriage contract. Bennett's pension and investment accounts were divided. He kept his practice, his professional reputation, and the cold gallery print from Yorkville. He did not keep Sabine. Terence heard, through the same informal channel, that the relationship had ended somewhere, around month 3 of the litigation. Around the time it became clear that Bennett's financial situation was considerably more complicated than he had represented it to be. Hazel did not feel triumphant about this. She felt, sitting in Douglas's office at Morrison and Webb on the Monday after the settlement was signed, a specific kind of lightness that she had not experienced in several years. The feeling of a structure that has been relieved of a load it was never designed to carry. She was back full-time at the firm by November. Eloise started junior kindergarten at the school in Picton, a small red brick building 2 streets from the farmhouse, where the class size was 14 children and the teacher had been teaching for 19 years and knew all the parents by their first names within 2 weeks. On a Saturday in early December, Hazel drove out to the site of a bridge assessment she was leading for a regional municipality. A concrete span over a creek outside Wellington, unremarkable from the road, but showing stress fractures in the south abutment that required attention. She stood on the deck in her sight vest in the cold and looked at the water running below, dark and quick with snowmelt. And she thought about the receipt from Auberge du Pommier. She thought about the kitchen table and the study exam and the cedar jewelry box and 11 months of carrying something very heavy in a very quiet way. The bridge had been standing for 62 years. The fractures were repairable. The foundation was sound. It just needed someone who knew what to look for and was willing to do the work. She took her measurements. She wrote up her notes. She drove back to Picton, picked up Eloise from her mother's, and made dinner in the farmhouse kitchen, with the east-facing window, and the wide pine floors and the spider plant on the sill, which had grown 2 new shoots since March and showed no intention of stopping. The most dangerous person in any room is not the one making the most noise. It's the one who has already done the math.